Thank you, thank you. Okay, 30 minutes to lunch. We can do this together. Okay, so my talk is called Got SSL. As you guys know, more people are connected to the web today than ever before, and from more places. So, we're connected with our laptops and our phones, our tablets, probably soon enough with personal devices and accessories. And we access the internet from untrusted and sometimes even hostile networks. With so much of our lives moving online, it's imperative we're taking steps to protect our data and our users' data. So this talk is my call to arms to all of you as developers. And in the next 30 minutes, I hope to convince you about the necessity and practicality of SSL, and then give you some pointers to show you how to actually make that happen. So this is probably a good place to start. What's SSL? It stands for Secure Sockets Layer, and it's a cryptographic protocol designed to provide communication security over the internet. I imagine a lot of people have heard of it. I'll just still do a quick intro. It guarantees privacy, and it does this via encryption and integrity. So this prevents somebody from snooping or tampering with the internet connection. It's had its share of security flaws over the years, but it's the leading and primary way today, and really the only way to ensure any kind of data communication security on the internet. There's a couple of acronyms that are thrown around interchangeably, so very quickly I'll clarify these. TLS, if you've heard of it, is for most intents and purposes the same as SSL. You can consider them synonyms. If we want to be precise, SSL 3.1 was renamed to TLS. SSL was the original name of the specification when this came out in the mid-90s from Netscape. And TLS is the IETF standard name, but they're interchangeable. I will refer to this as the protocol as SSL throughout this talk. And then HTTPS is HTTP over SSL. And I imagine most people are familiar with this too. It's actually not a protocol, but it's really just the layering of the security capabilities of SSL and standard HTTP. So if you're into internet protocol stacks, this is how it looks. I'll leave it as an exercise for all of you guys to read about the specifics of the SSL protocol. But you should know that it consists of two phases. So there's this first initial phase between the client, often case your browser, and the web server, and this is based on public-private key cryptography. This initial part of the protocol is a handshake, which is used to create a shared key, a shared secret. And the shared secret is used by the second part of the SSL protocol to actually encrypt the communication of a session. So networking on the internet, it feels safe, right? We open up a browser, we send a request to load some page in sort of the comfort of our device. The response page is delivered back to us. It feels like it's immediate. It's fast. It feels like we're talking directly to the website. But in reality, we know that it's not like this direct connection. And if you serve data over plain HTTP, between your browser and the server, you have absolutely no guarantees that the data that's been sent from your client to the server has not been tampered with or snooped by some person that has access to the network along the way. So I'm sure people are familiar with the comic XKCD. It's really hard for me to do a presentation without including some comic because there's just always something relevant. I'll give people a second to note our woman in the middle on the open Wi-Fi network. She's performing a man-in-the-middle attack. And as the name of the attack suggests, this is when an attacker places himself or herself or their malicious software in between a victim and a valuable resource. And in today's talk, I'm going to say that's your website. So there are almost always a few places someone can access the network between a request coming from a browser and the actual web server. So for example, who's on Google Guest right now? I imagine there's a couple people. OK, lots of people. So this is going through the Wi-Fi router that's run by Google. I don't know who it's run by. Maybe you do, and maybe you trust them. But then it's going on to some ISP and potentially other intermediate proxies between you on your laptop or your phone and that site, and then through all those hops on the way back. And if you are using HTTP, this is an entirely clear text protocol. Again, you have no guarantee that this data has not been logged or tampered with. That's going to be the meme kind of through this talk. Do you know or trust the people that run each one of those hops? If not, you should be concerned. So even more depressingly, even if you want HTTPS, you can actually still run into some issues if the site doesn't avoid some common downgrade vectors from HTTPS to HTTP. Users very rarely type in the full URL, the scheme, HTTPS, and the URL of where they want to go when they want to visit some site. So these things end up automatically, you're either being redirected by the site or you're clicking some link and going there. And all of these are opportunities for downgrade attacks. I'm going to talk at the end about how to actually avoid those, but the internet is a scary place. I'm going to go over just 2 tools that make these types of man-in-the-middle attacks really easy. I encourage you to check them out. Maybe someone is running them in the audience right now, but the first one is called SSL Strip. So man-in-the-middle attacks have been known about for a really long time. This tool came out in 2009, just as kind of a proof of concept of how easy these are to actually mount. But what SSL Strip does is it exploits the fact that often sites are still sending some requests over HTTP. As I mentioned, most people don't type it directly into their browser. They're either clicking a link or actually getting redirected from a site. So there's this window of opportunity for somebody to man in the middle and actually replace outbound links that are intended to be HTTPS with HTTP and back. And also, it does some homograph-style URL replacement, and it even throws in a lock icon. So people that are looking for that as a sense of security, get that warm, fuzzy feeling, but unfortunately without the security. SSL Strip came out in 2009. One that got quite a lot of broad attention was called Firesheep. This one came out the following year, in 2010. And it was much more usable from an attacker standpoint. You had a nice user interface, so that's probably why it got a little bit more attention. Firesheep was a passive man-in-the-middle attack, and then it just listened to an open Wi-Fi network for cookies that were being sent in the clear, authentication cookies, and then it would pop up people's accounts that it was able to hijack, and you could just click on them and automatically listen in on someone's chat or log into their Facebook account. So a site without SSL is telling its users that they don't care about the privacy and integrity, their privacy and integrity. So in the 90s, HTTPS was mainly considered, I think, something that the banking industry had to consider. But it's just not about banking anymore. And serving over plain HTTP is totally insecure. Leave with that message. Neither the browser nor the server can trust any of the data that's sent between over HTTP. And this is a sad state for users and site operators as well. And we know it's not just a plausible risk. So we have evidence of both targeted and large-scale government-run snooping operations. And awkward laugh. If you care about the privacy and integrity of your users' data, you need to be using SSL. I would even go so far as to say, if you don't care about the privacy and integrity of your users' data, what kind of app are you actually, how interesting is the app that you're writing? There are very few exceptions that I can think of where this should not be seen as a requirement. Okay, so hopefully you guys all want SSL now, so it's time to get it. I will continue my sales pitch by saying that SSL is fast, cheap, and easier than ever to get, which is good news. So on my slide, I have a quote from Adam Langley, who works at Google and has done a tremendous amount of work getting SSL support at Google and kind of across the internet. One of the most common excuses that I hear from developers about why they don't have SSL is the performance and cost impact. And to be fair, 10 years ago, this was a legitimate concern and complaint. I mentioned this first part of the SSL protocol. You do public key cryptography, and this is expensive computationally. It's really just all the cost is in this handshake. After that, it's never really been too much of an issue. 10 years ago, this required dedicated hardware. It's not the case today. This quote was from 2010 when Google started supporting SSL for Gmail by default for all users, and it required no additional hardware and really had a very limited performance impact. So it's not too expensive. Running an application over SSL is really no different from communicating directly on TCP. So there's very few application modifications you need to do as far as performance goes. You'll want to check out operational things, operational pieces to actually SSL deployment, like how and where you deploy your SSL servers and record size and memory buffers and a lot of little configuration things, which I'm not going to go over today, but which there's a really good reference for in this book that I have linked. There's sort of links sprinkled throughout the slides if anything is interesting. This book, High Performance Browser Networking, is by Ilya, who I think spoke either earlier yesterday or is speaking today. And it has a great checklist of things that you'll want to consider when deploying SSL, and it's free. So again, no excuse. SSL is not a performance hindrance. It's also free. So you can get free certs from startssl.com. This is just one that I've used and I know other people use. You can get free for non-commercial uses. If you have a commercial use, it's something like $60. So it's cheap. And you know, we have it, it's fast, it's cheap. And I'm even going to go so far as to say that SSL is easy to deploy. It's deceptively easy to deploy, in fact. So there's a couple mistakes that people need to avoid. But there's a really useful guide that's put out by SSLLabs.com. And it goes over all of the things that you need to do in detail. And more importantly, it has an automated tester. So you can actually check that you did everything right and fix all the mistakes and then feel confident that you're getting all these things right. So SSL it's fast, it's cheap, it's easy. Get it, and then let's get it right. So you can test for your actual SSL deployment using SSLLabs.com. But I want to go over a couple of the application bugs that I see most commonly. So all sites fall into three categories when it comes to SSL adoption. There are the sites which don't offer it at all. For HTTP-only sites, users should expect absolutely no security. At least they know what they're getting. Then there's sites that only serve exclusively over HTTPS or on SSL. And in this case, users should expect, private and untempered communication for the most part, barring any bugs we don't know about. And the world is a happy place. And then there are the sites that intentionally or sometimes even inadvertently are serving both over HTTP and HTTPS HTTPS. We call this mixed content or sites with mixed content. And this is where we run into some problems. So unfortunately, situations where you're serving some of your site or some resources that you're fetching over HTTP can lead to downgrade attacks. If you can avoid the situation, you should do it. If not, and this is the case for a lot of sites, you're going to need to take some extra considerations into account. So as I said, if you're serving anything over HTTP, you need to take some extra steps to avoid some man-in-the-middle attacks. These are specific classes of man-in-the-middle attacks. So I talked about downgrade attacks. You can also leak cookies. If anybody can tamper the data, they can inject script and actually do like a cross-site scripting attack and render script, which kind of mutes whatever security you would have gotten with SSL. Even if you don't care about security, you need to care about mixed content bugs because browsers are going to make the experience for your users worse. So as of Chrome 29, Chrome blocks mixed content that is coming from an iframe, JavaScript, cascading style sheets, and plugin loads by default. Firefox has similar behavior. And you can see in the top bar, that's what the Chrome bar looks like. If a user tries to visit your site over SSL, but you have any kind of active content being served over HTTP, it's not going to load by default, and they're going to actually have to click to load. So your page is probably going to break. Your user's going to be annoyed because they have to press a button just to get the page to work, and that sucks. Also, browsers block other types of content like images, or they don't block them, but you automatically lose your green icon. So you lose that warm, fuzzy kind of assurance to users that you care about security because you're serving some mixed content. You also get a little warning in Chrome that you can click on. So, as I said, even if you don't care about mixed content, for security's sake, you should care about it because users are going to get a degraded experience when they visit your sites, at least in Chrome and Firefox. So, how do we actually fix mixed content bugs? Thankfully, it's fairly easy. What we need to do is make sure that all of our resources are loaded by HTTPS, that are loaded on an HTTPS page by HTTPS. So if these resources are in the same domain, you can just use relative URLs. If you have to use an absolute path, you want to omit the scheme or the protocol, and the browser will figure it out by itself. In the second example, I actually include an example of a scheme relative URL, which can look kind of funky if you've never seen it before, but it works. So that's how you fix mixed content bugs. Not too hard. Mixed content is a big one. Maybe arguably the one that's a little bit harder to fix because there may be multiple instances of this. But another really common application bug that I've seen is not preventing sensitive cookies from leaking over HTTP. So if your cookies are sensitive, and in a lot of cases they are, they're doing something with authentication or safe preferences, it's imperative that you ensure they don't get sent over an HTTP connection. And to do this, you have to ensure that you have the secure bit set on your set cookie header. It's unfortunate that it requires that because a lot of apps have missed that, and this is actually how Firesheep worked, right? It relied on the fact that a lot of sites were not setting sensitive cookies with a secure bit, and they're easy to sniff and then use to hijack people's accounts. So a recent and interesting development in the wild world of SSL is something called strict transport security. This is a mechanism that allows websites to opt in for HTTPS-only rendering and also strict HTTPS cert validation. So the first tool I mentioned, called SSL Strip, it exploited the fact that most people don't type in HTTPS when they visit a site. They're typing in just the domain name or clicking on a link or going to some bookmark. And in that case, there's a small window of opportunity where the user makes HTTP requests that someone's allowed to man in the middle. So strict transport security, or HSTS as it's abbreviated, attempts to address that threat. Once this header is saved in the browser, it's going to bump automatically all HTTP traffic to HTTPS, and it will reject, any attempt to visit that site over a non-encrypted channel. So this is actually really good. I'm seeing more sites adopt this. There's still a very, very small window of opportunity that an attacker can man in the middle, where someone's just installed the browser and they actually don't have this header set yet by the application. So Chrome and Firefox actually come with some hard-coded sites that have elected into always using HSTS. So some examples are Twitter, PayPal, there's Google sites on there, and LastPass. If you as a developer want your site to only be ever accessed over SSL, you can actually just file a bug. If you visit the link on this slide, you'll get all the right contacts, and we can include your site as well in this hard-coded list. But that's strict transport security. Another cool and even more recent development is something called public key pinning. So public key pinning is designed to give website operators a means to restrict which certificate authorities can actually issue certificates for their sites. So this feature's been deployed for Google Chrome for a while, and it has proven to be useful in preventing attacks and actually making the public aware of them. So if people potentially heard about in the news how there was a Dutch CA that was exploited in issuing forged certificates for Google.com. It was believed that the hackers were targeting Iranian citizens. Cert pinning is the feature that actually allowed us to detect these forged certs. So there are two proposals being worked on right now to try to make this a standard. And we're hoping that that happens and that other websites can actually use the public key pinning feature at some point. Okay, so I've spent my entire time talking up here about how awesome SSL is, but I do want to make sure people leave with a totally accurate impression of what this gives you, because SSL is not a security silver bullet. It's good, you need to do it. It's not security magic dust and the only thing you have to do. So go over a couple disclaimers. So first, SSL, it doesn't actually guarantee 100% privacy. So we're piggybacking HTTP entirely on top of SSL. So we know that all of that is encrypted. We get the request URL, query parameters, contents of the page, headers and cookies, all that's encrypted and private. So this is good. But SSL it's working on top of the TCP layer, so which requires IP address and port numbers. So these are necessarily going to be leaking to somebody who's listening on an open network. And also, while you can't infer the actual contents of the communication, you can still infer the amount and duration of the communication. So you're potentially left open to some kind of traffic analysis or pattern analysis attacks. And in very specific services, it's been demonstrated that you could infer something useful from this. And people have countered this with padding attacks. But the reality is this is just not something that the vast majority of applications are going to need to worry about. But you should know that there are some information side channels that are being leaked. So also, as I said, SSL is a transport protocol, so attacks at other layers are not going to be prevented. So in particular, IP-level threats, so denial of service attacks or any kind of network spoofing attacks, they're not protected by SSL. And then also, you'll have to consider other web application vulnerabilities. If you've heard of cross-site scripting or SQL injection, these things aren't prevented by SSL. So you still got to think about that. But that said, SSL is it's the best thing we have today as far as protecting users' data communication, and ensuring any kind of level of security for your site and your users. So earlier this week, a couple days ago, the EFF published this article with associated infographic about SSL adoption from the list of companies in their Who's Got Your Back program. So the program are companies that have committed to preventing unlawful government access to their data. I think it's interesting. Go Google, go Twitter, go Dropbox, and some other ones that are getting 5 stars across the board for what they're doing. But I think this is interesting for people as a user. You should check this out, and you should be demanding SSL for the services you use. So file bugs, chime in on forums, and grab your digital pitchforks. Demand SSL for what you use, and provide it for your users too. This is another cool project. It's called SSL Pulse, and this project aims to measure the effective security of SSL across the internet. So they look at about 200,000 SSL-enabled websites from Alexa's list of most popular sites. They refresh their data every month, and this is just two graphs. I encourage you to check out the project because they show a lot of other statistics about where we're at SSL-wise. And they've kept the same methodology and sample approach for the past 2 years, so you can kind of see trends in SSL. A year ago today, November 2012, we had about just under 15% SSL adoption. So it's really cool to see that we're now over 50% adoption, at least in these top sites. But need your help to help push that even further. And yeah, that's it. I think I hope you're not just hungry for lunch, but hungry to get SSL working. I promise you that if you if you're not enjoying the summit or need something to do this evening, you can get SSL set up on a personal site for free. StartSSL.com in less than an hour, and that's like while you're chatting to your friends and like eating a bag of chips. Test it out, get it working, get SSL.